Welcome back everyone, it's Freddy here. Today I want to talk about epoxy resin. Epoxy is used in building construction for decades, I'd say. But in the last couple of years, it came more and more into wood crafting to build those really fancy looking, for example, riverbed tables. But there is an untold truth, I'd say. Epoxy is kind of a shitty material working with. It's really bad for you, for your health. It's really bad for the environment, and it's freaking expensive. So today I want to find out if there are any good alternatives. So what's the idea? The idea is that I'll build three different tables, three different riverbed tables using different methods or approaches and compare those ones. The first method is to use an inlay out of wood. The second approach is to use a mineral filling. The third one is to use the actual
For the first comparison, I only assume the tabletop, not the table as a whole, because regardless of the method, the base and the legs, of course, they are always the same. For the first method, all you need is wood in different colors. I've chosen oak for the outer edges and spruce for the inlay. Oak is a bit darker compared to spruce, which creates that lovely contrast. The main task involves rooting the edges of the individual pieces until they fit together. It's actually quite time consuming. Rooting, sanding, testing, making adjustments, sanding again, testing again. In the end, it took a few hours, I'd say 2 to 3, before I was actually happy with the result. Once the wood inlay was finished and fitted together, all I had to do was sand down the surface and to oil it. So all in all, let's say 3 hours of working to finish the tabletop. For the second method, I made a mineral inlay. First, I mixed a filler powder, a plaster filler powder with water until it formed like a thick paste. The mixture is then poured between the wooden edges and smoothed out. That's basically it, so now you just have to wait until it's fully dried out, but that's just waiting, not working, so I won't consider that one. Finally, I sanded the surface as well, same as the previous tabletop, and to enhance the contrast, I treated it with a dark wood stain. The final steps, sanding and applying the stain, I repeated those steps one more time, and all in all, it took me an hour at most to finish the tabletop. As I don't factor in the drying time, it was significantly quicker than the first method. For the last method, I used epoxy. To do this, the chemicals are simply mixed together and also poured between the two edges. It then hardens. Depending on the room temperature, this can take anywhere from a couple of hours to 1 or 2 days. Finally, the surface is simply polished, making this the quickest of the three methods, taking all in all about half an hour.
Alright, criteria number 2, cost of material. I will only take into account the actual cost of the inlay. So for approach number 1, for the wooden inlay, the wood I've used in the center was beech, and that was quite cheap, I'd say. So for the plank, it was cut out of one plank, and I've paid like $6 for that. So that was really on the cheap side. Same goes for the lime. I've used roughly 1.5 kilogram, and that one was a bit more expensive, like 7 or 8 euro. For epoxy, I needed way more, roughly 6 kilograms out of it, and that one was pretty expensive. That one actually costs roughly 100 bucks. So 10, 12, 13 times more compared to lime or wood. All right, third criteria is the environmental point of view. What I've did, I've calculated the carbon dioxide that is emitted during the processes of obtaining and proceeding the material.
Processing of the spruce for the wooden inlay emits approximately 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide. For plaster, it's roughly half of that. Epoxy, on the other hand, as it is a fossil-based raw material, it causes emissions of approximately 35 kilogram carbon dioxide. The emissions from wood and plaster are equivalent to driving a few kilometers, about half a dozen blocks. For epoxy, it's comparable to 300 kilometers, which is the distance from Berlin to Bremen. I can't think of anyone who would drive to Bremen, but you could do so for the same amount of emissions.
So you see, epoxy might be the fastest way of building the table, or the less working intense, but it's definitely the most expensive one and the worst material for the environment. All right, to give epoxy a fair chance, I've also added a fourth criteria, which is the aesthetics. So how does the table look compared to the others? That one is pretty hard to compare because it is really just personal opinion. But I try to bring that one into perspective as well.
Oh, epoxy, you can be so beautiful and dazzling, provided no one makes a mistake when working with you. Otherwise, you're not quite so shiny. Yes, epoxy looks, when done correctly, the most spectacular. The colors are just so intense, but it also looks kinda natural. The other two tables, they are more subdued, less vibrant in color, but calmer all in all.
So, to conclude it, an epoxy looks really, really fancy. Also artificial, yeah, but really, really fancy. But also is pretty bad. It's a pretty bad work material. I think we can be that honest. So, as I said in the beginning, it is pretty expensive, like 10 times, 12 times more expensive than using wood. Pretty bad for the environment, like 50 times worse than wood or lime. And that one, from my point of view, doesn't justify the looks of it. So I think I'd say for me it was a cool experience, but I'm not too sure if I'll continue working with epoxy in the future. Yeah.